Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Arts House, Leyden, I believe. We are here today to discuss the life and times of three really influential theatre makers in Singapore, namely Kuo Pao Kun, William Teo, and Tina Sergeant. We have three lovely panelists here, each with different relationships to these three people, and hopefully today you'll be able to kind of learn a bit about the history of Singapore theatre, what it was like in the nascent stages, especially in the early years, but more importantly, what it meant to them, as the theme of this panel is, what it meant to create spaces and to bring people together as part of theatre making. Okay, so I'm Olivia and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. I have here on my right Tisa Sitaran, who really needs no introduction, but I shall anyway, who was the second artistic director of the substation after Kuo Pao Kun and co-founder and current director of ITI. We have again on his right Jeremiah Choi, also really needs no introduction, who's a long-time creative director, producer, and collaborator with William Teo in the early days in ARTC, right? So the arts in Asia and Theatre Research Circles. Interesting, provocative name. And last but not least, we have Liz Sergeant Tan, who is a full-time performer and artist as well. And also, if you haven't yet guessed, the daughter of Tina Sergeant. Okay, so we're going to start first. So first, this came about when SIFA approached Centre 42. So just for context, so I'm one of the current dramaturgs in residence at Centre 42, and they wanted to kind of explore the impact of these three theatre makers, and Adeline and Robin decided to come together and make three documentaries that are currently screening, I believe yesterday and today, in the screening room downstairs at the back. So if you do have time, I would encourage you to go and view these screenings. I mean, they're absolutely beautiful documentaries that I've learned a lot from as someone who's kind of researched into Singapore theatre history as well. But we'll start first. So this kind of is an accompaniment to that. And we'll start first, perhaps, by speaking to our panelists and hearing a bit from our panelists of how these three theatre makers and themselves, they're all kind of directly related to one of them in particular, but I want to hear perhaps about how their relationship with them in the practice, in the culture, and in the craft has informed the way they practice, hold space, and create space for theatre today. We'll start perhaps with Sasi.
Thank you, Olivia. In a strange kind of coincidence, I've had dealings, I have had links with all three of the people that we are considering today. Of course, Pao Kun was the one I was most immediately and directly working with. But William and Christina were always a part of that space, which I can still recall quite clearly, which I considered the space for theatre in Singapore. What's remarkable, as I was thinking about this talk today, was that there were so many qualities that these three individuals had, which resonated deeply and has ultimately, I think, informed the way I work in theatre, or I have worked in theatre. I think for all three of these individuals, and for Pao Kun in particular, theatre was the center of a universe. It was the center of the way in which we could interact with the world. It provided solace, it provided criticality, and most importantly, it provided a means to challenge what was considered to be the status quo in society. And for Pao Kun, this quality of theatre derives from his own background in theatre making, in playwriting, and as a dramatist. And it was deeply informed by the Chinese theatre, the people's theatre, the Chinese people's art theatre, the people's theatre in Beijing. And this was a theatre that had to make a difference to society. It had to inform society. But at the same time, it had to lift society. And this was something that he was absolutely clear about. That if we are going to do theatre, then we must do it for the people. Theatre must reflect the concerns of the people, the needs of the people. And ultimately, it has to give them succor. It has to comfort them, show them an aspect of life which sometimes we tend to forget in the hustle and bustle of reality. And for him, the fundamental quality that a theatre maker had to have was discipline. You had to be committed to what you were doing, to the craft, to the work, to the production, to your fellow artists. And if you are not capable of such discipline and commitment to technique, then your theatre is bound not to be significant. This was something that he had an absolute faith in. And he would always tell me just one thing. He said, if you are going to be a good artist, you have to be a good person. It's a ridiculous statement to me. At one level, it is an absolutely ridiculous statement to make. But this was something that he held fast onto. And over the years, this was something that has deeply inspired me. Throughout my practice, my work, my teaching, my interactions with fellow theatre makers, I've always looked for the way in which we can find our means to be good. I don't know what it means to be good. And I think for each one of us, what it means to be good is going to be different. But the struggle to find that means to be good, that was a key thing that he wanted to instill in artists. And he would always tell me, if you stop struggling, it's over. There's no point doing any work if you are no longer struggling. This too I have taken to heart. The last thing, the last point I want to make is this. And this is something that connects Pao Kun to William and to Christina. And this is the dedication to craft. Pao Kun was absolutely dedicated to the craft of theatre, in the whole wide sense of that word. The craft of writing, the craft of staging, the craft of directing, the craft of acting. All of it was based on technique, methodology, training, study, connection to people, interaction with other people. If all of these elements were not there, the work is not going to be good. And whenever he had a doubt, he always opened the circle up so that people could come in to counsel him, to counsel us. There was a play that I was with him, Sunset Rise, I think. And there was a scene when one of the actresses was going to essentially say the prayer, the Muslim prayer on stage. And we were not sure if that would cause offense, if it might be considered rude or inappropriate to have that scene on stage played by a Muslim actress. So Pao Kun invited people to come and watch the dress rehearsal. And who did he invite? He invited the Malay MPs. He invited people from the Malay community. And we played the scene. And then we spoke to the audience, who felt that it was fine. He had this way of opening things up. And one of the things that he always told me was, never shy away from engagement. No matter how difficult it is, no matter how much it may run against your own instincts, always reach out and engage. Never disconnect. And this, I think, was at the heart of the way in which he built communities. This was also at the heart of William's work, the way in which he would reach out to people. And although I had never worked with Christina before, this was the way Christina was as a person. She was welcoming, she was accommodating, and she was open. The most fundamental thing about all three of these people, the most significant lesson, I think, that I've taken away from their work and my experiences of all three of them, is that theatre matters. And unless you are prepared to give up the time and the effort and the thought that's necessary to make theatre into a practice that can connect with people, it's not worth doing. That's it. Thank you.
That actually made me really emotional just hearing it. I mean, I'm not the only one. But I mean, there is such a clear, which I forgot to mention just now, there will be time for anyone and everybody here to engage in conversation, to ask questions, to engage in discussion. I will make sure there's enough time for that. So if you have anything that comes up as these speakers are presenting, just hold on to that, and we'll definitely be getting to you. So thank you so much for that. I think there's something really that is in engagement and communities that really underpins his work, and that discipline and craft. That I have never met Kuo Pao Kun. When he passed, I was not a baby. I was a child, probably. But even then, so many practitioners who I've met and have worked with him, then there's so much, for example, of Nelson's practice in 9 years that I didn't know. I thought that was just how he worked, and then after hearing these stories, I go, oh, that makes so much sense now. So pass the time over to kind of Jeremiah to tell us a bit about William, who also really influenced Nelson actually.
Thank you very much. Before I start, I'd like to say that memory is a construct, or rather memory is a reconstruct. We choose to remember what we want to remember. So if my memory is different from the memory of yours with William or anybody else, please, it's a different memory, okay? We all deserve our own memories, okay? With that, I'd like to start off with my memory, my working memory with Pao Kun first, okay? I didn't work directly with Pao Kun, but I worked under TheatreWorks, two of his plays, Descendants of the Yunnan Emperor, where Casey was also in the first production, his first English production of Descendants of the Yunnan Emperor, and subsequently we did the Spirits play under TheatreWorks also. And Ong King Sen at that time, when he just came back, or he was in New York City, and when Pao Kun came to see our rehearsals, and there we were spinning, stripping, tearing his script to the barest minimum. Pao Kun was very open, very generous, and when asked of his opinion, he just turned to us and said, "辛苦了." 辛苦了 means thanks for working so hard. And that was my memory of Pao Kun, in the sense that though he has written a very, very powerful play about eunuchs, all right, castration in relation to maybe the Singapore context, and yet we were doing it we were totally giving it a different spin, all pun intended. We were literally spinning on stage while saying lines and things like that, right? And he looked at it, and then he had this puzzled face, but he did not say anything to the contrary. And all he did was to encourage us, and that same too for Spirit Play. Okay, now on to William. I know of William, or I've seen his plays way before I started work with TheatreWorks in 1988. So before that, William started a lot of work under TheatreWorks, like his Mother Courage, which is site-specific. He also did House of Bernarda Alba and all that. And what struck me was his aesthetic, the beauty of theatre. Doesn't matter anything else, but it's just so beautiful to look at, right? So my chance encounter with him was that I won a hair cutting voucher from my Cambridge D&D. So that was my first, at that time very expensive, $30 a haircut, right? And he had this hair salon called Botticelli, and everybody knows that William, and the moment William is very persuasive. The moment he wants you to participate in his show, he will talk and talk and talk, and my hair got shorter and shorter and shorter. And so my first show with him after Beauty World with TheatreWorks was actually retrospective, The Sword Has Two Ages, okay, where I played a general called Liu Bu, and called Screaming Harajuku Girl by the Sixth Sense critic, but it didn't matter. I got to wear beautiful costumes. But that's how I got to know William, in a sense that his theatre is very different. From William, he taught me the sacredness of the space. He said, whenever we perform to the gods, we perform to the king, and we perform to the people, and we perform to the ghosts or the spirits, in that sense. So what does it mean is that people will look at your performances in different lights, and therefore the ritualistic aspect of theatre is very, very important to him. And he accepts anybody, as long as you're interested in a production, and as long as you come, he will make sure that you have a space on the stage, right? So some people leave after some time, but a lot of us stuck around because partly because of the suppers he cooked. After that, William always cooks supper after rehearsals. Most of the rehearsals are held in his house at a place near CJC, and he will then make all of us cook, and after that we will sit down and we'll talk about the rehearsal, about the play, about anything. And he believed in this communal or community of theatre that the people joined him as a result, right? So that was something that I learned from him. Everything on stage must be beautiful. Even if it's ugly, it must be ugly beautiful. Even if you're a tree, you must be a tree. You must have a reason why you're there. And I learned the word presence from him. To be present, to have presence on stage, you have to be present. You cannot be standing on stage and thinking of what I'm going to have for supper. That's something he taught me very, very well, in the sense that actually you have to be there. There was one moment that I did a play which I lost my moment and I lost my line, and my mind went blank, and suddenly the spirits come back, in that sense, and you continue with it. So I learned that lesson of being present, because if you're not there and your mind floats, that's why he says, where's your mind? Come back, come back, come back. So that was also another very important practice that William has in that. He's always very generous, but sometimes it's very frustrating working with him, because you don't understand what he's trying to say. Alright, people will work with him, he has a vision, he knows what he wants, but he sometimes can't articulate it, and then he gets into this struggle with words. Sometimes we all have to second guess, all have to interpret what he was trying to say, and then during supper after that, then we understand what he was trying to say at that moment in time. So some of the things working with William, it's a lot of funny stories. Another story was I was vegetarian for some bit of time. When I was doing M Butterfly, I decided I want to be vegetarian, right? So I was also rehearsing with him at the same time. So he was cooking, and then he was cooking escargot. So I told William, I'm vegetarian. Then he said, escargot is vegetarian. The escargot is vegetarian. So he really has a very open mind. He really has he's unfazed. Anything goes. If people drop out, he'll find a means of getting somebody else to come in. If things don't work, he'll find a way of working. And so actually through William, I learned a lot of those things about not being too troubled when things don't work. So sometimes with the people I work with nowadays, they say, how come you are so unfair? Why are you so chill about it? I said, it is what it is. It will take care of itself, and it will happen when it happens, right? The other thing about William and his theatre is community theatre, and what really happens is that he loves to expose the pre-show and the post-show to the audience. So when we were doing Conference of the Birds at the Mobile Theatre, the SRT is now, he will have all the actors with individual boxes. These are our dressing room, our makeup desk and all that. And you will have the audience come in half hour, 45 minutes before the show itself, and the audience will get to see us making up, even talking to us. There's no secretness about, you can't meet anybody before your show time. Nowadays, right, you can't sneak out and say hello to your friends and come back in, right? She's okay, you can be dressed up, all that, and then we'll do our warm-ups in front of the audience. So the whole ritual is exposed to the audience. And after the show, he will invite the audience to stay back to have 茶叶蛋, tea eggs with tea, and sometimes wine. and that is not so much to talk about the show, and if anybody wants to talk about the show, yes, of course, but it's just about theatre community fellowship, that he wanted to build this fellowship amongst people who come to his theatre to talk. Maybe they didn't see the show before, or maybe he will interest them in the show after. But it's people who work with William know each other very well, and it's a community always working with him as that. And with that community, I was commissioned in 2011 by Lodi Hong for the Arts Festival to commemorate William's 10th anniversary. I've worked with Christina Sergeant a number of times, but that particular work with Tina was very special. So I was commissioned by the Arts Festival to not direct Conference of the Birds, but to facilitate William Teo's direction for Conference of the Birds. So what I was trying to do is to expose William's methodology of theatre to a whole group, a new generation of theatre practitioners, people like So Chen, quite a number of them are new at that time. And of course, I invited some of the older William Teo's performers back as well, and Tina Sergeant was one of them. And the way we casted was very, very interesting. We have all the birds lying on the ground. I went through an exercise. I said, okay, open your eyes and you pick the bird that you want to work with. Nobody there pick up the hoopoe. And in my heart, Tina. Of course, and it's a very William Teo thing. Because when you have rehearsed with William Teo, you think that you contributed to the scene, but actually William manipulated that you contributed to the scene. So I was doing a very William Teo thing, right, Nora? So it was, in my mind, I had Tina as the hoopoe, but I didn't say that to anybody, and I didn't say that to Tina as well. But she picked up the hoopoe because my heart already prayed for it. So that was a show that I worked with Tina, and I'm so blessed to have her because of her generosity, her openness, her willingness to show her practice with William to the other new practitioners as well. So it's not just me telling the world about what William Teo was and how William Teo did his theatre. I had her help as well, and she's so generous about it. So yeah, that's my memories of the three of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I mean, memory is indeed a construct, and even though I've never been there for any of it, I do really wish that I had been myself and almost could place myself in there. But I think it's always interesting, right? When we look back at something, there's this tendency to reminisce, to kind of long for something, especially for people of my age, perhaps, who've never been there, and we look like, oh, it's great. Like, it sounds like these experiences, what I would give to be that rehearsal room, or these rehearsal processes. But, I mean, we live in I think, quite a different world, quite a different Singapore, perhaps. One of the things we take for granted as theatre practitioners now is how hard they work to negotiate and find what it means to make Singapore theatre. Right, whereas now we're like, oh, Singapore theatre, yeah, you can rattle off, 5 different company names. More than that, actually, you can rattle off company names, but, at that time, what was Singapore theatre? And I mean, Tina contributed so much to that ecosystem of Singapore theatre as well. So, take it away, Liz.
Have at it. Hi, everyone. Going into this talk, okay, it is really surreal to be sitting next to these two people. This is my principal from ICI. I've known you since I was a child. It's very surreal to be sitting here. I knew I'd be crying. I have a system. My clean tissues are in this pocket, and my dirty tissues are in this pocket. So do excuse any tears that may flow. My mother, Tina Sergeant. It's a bit different from the experiences you guys have, of course, because I'm her daughter. I never worked with her in the rehearsal room. I maybe did 3 or 4 lessons with her as an angry teenager in SOTA. Like, I was just like, why are you teaching me? And I was like, idiot, you're so lucky. I didn't know better. So I can only really talk about her as the professional I experienced learning about her after her death. So far, I have made 2 pieces of art relating to her as an artist. I made a short movie about her called I Summon You, and it was a movement film about my mother, about her death, her passing, the years afterwards, the effect that she gave to me. And then last year, I wrote a play about her for the theater practice, not theater practice, oh my god. Finger Players. The Finger Players had their puppet origin stories, sadly the last installment, and they asked me to write a play about my mother and her company, Mime Unlimited. So I wrote a show called The Cat and the Faceless Maiden, and it was about her and her work and the legacies that people like William Kuo Pao Kun and my mother leave behind, these massive shadows. Okay, so to reorganize, when I was growing up, I knew my mother as my mother. She had this uncanny ability to find anybody on the street that she knew, and then she would talk to them. So I'd be like 5 years old, 7 years old, and I would just be walking around with my mother, and then she would stop. And I'd be used to this at this point. If she stopped, I'd look at her and be like, oh, she's gonna go talk to somebody. She's gonna go talk to you probably, or you on the street. She'd talk to them for like minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Sometimes we'd stop whatever we were doing and go to a cafe and sit. And then they would be talking. Of course, I didn't appreciate this as a child. I was very impatient to just go home and play, whatever. But I think in later years, I realized this was so much part of her as an artist and a human being, her incredible ability to communicate what she meant and what she felt. It was not just an ability to communicate logically, like concepts, techniques, teaching, but also an ability to communicate from the heart. And then a lot of this knowledge that I know of her as an artist comes posthumously, because it's different to grow up as her daughter, but then also become a professional and step into the world that she helped create alongside many other people who contributed. I'm pretty sure the reason I went to ITI is because of my mother. Because my mother told me years before she passed on, offhandedly, ITI is the place you go to where you work 90 hours a week and then you sleep on the weekends. And and I'm like, that doesn't sound very good. That sounds awful. And then years later, I was like, oh, that's exactly what I want. Go figure. So yes, her incredible ability to communicate, techniques, words, languages. She had such a gift for English in a way that. So when I was a child, a mixed kid growing up in a mostly Chinese school with no other mixed kids, I was very scared to use English. So I aped my mother's accent. Like I mimicked it perfectly to the point where my uncles from overseas would call and be like, Tina? No. And then so yeah, even the degree of how she spoke really had such an effect on me. She would read to me read to my brothers and I almost every evening. So she had this incredible gift for language, for passing it on. I have stacks and stacks of her notes, her incredibly detailed notes in class plans, like poems, resources, just so many of them, I don't know what to do with them. And also, in the same vein, this is a woman who loves words and language so much, but she was also such a physical human being. Physical human being in the sense that when she walked into a room, you know, like instantly, like, oh, that's her. When I would run away from her during shopping excursions to the grocery center, I would run through the lanes, and I would just like run past each and every aisle until I saw my mother, tall, blonde, really good posture, like run, and I was like, there she is. You'd always know who she was because she had such a strong presence. She actually wasn't that tall, but everyone who met her always would tell me, she's really tall. She's really tall. You know, I was digging through the ITI costume store one day, and I found like one of her costumes, and I knew it was her costume because I had her handwriting on it saying "Mime Unlimited" in the tag. I was like, okay. Sorry, I think I've lost the track of it. Go figure. Let's go find it. I wanted to talk about her impact on me as a physical performer. I also really love language and words, but I think because of how I grew up watching, actually I think I have a very vague memory. I don't know, when was Mahabharata?
Mahabharata 20.
I can look for the.
Yeah, look for the year.
I
Yeah,
can look for the year.
yeah,
It
it
was
was
a
a
Ramayana.
sensation.
It was one of the shows that
Mahabharata.
Oh.
I do believe that.
1995.
Okay, no, I cannot remember that. It's so weird.
That's the one. 1995.
Maybe it was the Ramayana. It was also at the now gone Telagaya Performing Arts Center. Yes.
Yeah.
I was dragged along with her to watch all of these shows growing up. Many shows which I'm sure all of you remember watching as well. I would watch her Mime Unlimited performances. I'd be getting underfoot in her rehearsals and very unprofessionally begging her actors for piggyback rides. She tolerated all of this and more, and because I didn't know until I was older, I didn't really have the idea of how much work it took to grow a community like that. To open a space, to open a company, to put out newspaper articles, advertisements saying, we want mimes. Which, by the way, Kuo Pao Kun actually was the person who encouraged her to open that. She was like, there's an interview with her at the National Archives where she's telling Kuo Pao Kun, she speaks of this herself, she's like, Pao Kun, who wants to learn mime? Like, who am I going to teach mime to in Singapore? And then he was like, you should just try, you should just ask. And so she put a newspaper advertisement saying, we want mimes. And a whole bunch of people responded. So that's another small link, I think. Yes, it took a lot of effort and generosity. And I think that's something that also marked her as a human being. Her incredible generosity and presence of the heart that let her communicate all of these techniques but also the why of it. Like, why are you doing the things that you are doing? She was very insistent, I think, and this I only know secondhand. She was very insistent that why are you doing things? And I know this because I would talk to juniors of mine from SOTA, who all learned under her in theater. And she's like, yeah, she was really strict. She was really nice. And she had this amazing ability to be really stern and really kind all at the same time. Going back to how she impacted me as a physical performer, I didn't learn mime until I went to California to go bother Young Seng and Charmaine Diaz, who were colleagues of hers in Mime Unlimited. And I asked young YT, as most of us know him, YT, like, can you teach me some corporeal mime? It's so hard. It's like really, really hard. I don't know how she managed to teach all of that and like distill all of those techniques to teach a whole troop of people who I grew up watching and who impacted me and my aesthetic and my choices, even now, are very much shaped by all that I watched growing up of Mime Unlimited. I think, there's that saying, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I really do feel that when I think about people like my mother, like Pao Kun, like William Teo. And I'm very grateful to be part of this community that she helped build. Sorry, that totally ran away from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Time check. You doing all right? Yeah, I mean, all the poetry, all the writings, you will see actually in the documentary that's in the free too. They had like snippets of all of that, and I think it's so interesting. So there was a kind of a thread, kind of a panel as well earlier today that was talking about the idea of future-proofing the festival and what that might look like and things like that. And I was just so struck by the fact that this conversation, we've never once talked about ecosystems, infrastructure, and we've talked about the word community and how much community plays such a big role in creating kind of a space for theatre to kind of build. And when we talk about space, lots of questions will come up about the losses of space as well, I think, in this discussion. Anyway, enough from me. And I'm wondering, I would like to open the floor now to anyone else, to anyone here really, who has any questions, who has any musings that they might want to offer or share, or ask any of our panelists here with regard to kind of maybe Singapore theatre or these three individuals who are giants in theatre scene really. Anyone? We have 2 microphones there, so mic.
Yeah, well, Ollie, it's interesting that you referenced the earlier panel because what I'm about to see in some sense connects to the discussion in the earlier panel as well. One of the things I think I took from the earlier panel that I thought was interesting was a point that I think Charlene made about trying to better educate the audience for theatre to move them away from simply being, I think what she meant, something like a passive consumer of theatre. And for me, it sort of resonates in a way with what Sasi was talking about in Pao Kun especially. Because the anecdote that you gave, where Pao Kun invited the Malay community, the MPs, I think was, as you said, motivated by a concern that that particular scene might cause offense. So the idea was to engage the community to get the sense of how they responded. Like presumably if they had said it was offensive, it would have been removed the scene or modified in some way or other. But to me, this whole thing about engaging the community, I mean, we're talking about a different kind of time, where a different kind of demographic audience expectations are changing, people are more educated, they've had theatre in different versions as well. So Pao Kun's philosophy of theatre for the people, I think has to evolve so that it's not just created by a company or even an individual for the people, but by creating for the people, yes, the creation process has to be with the people. So I would like to maybe even ask, in some ways, to link back to what Charlene was talking about, to link that particular anecdote, open it up to a point where I think it should be more normalized, where the process of devising the work consistently engages, not just even before, after the performance is over, but consistently, and it's a judicious kind of thing for the creator to decide how much to take in, how much not to. And I know this is already being done in some circles, but I think it is not normalized enough. And the reason why I think it links to the theme of the earlier panel also is that it is this kind of normalization where you engage the audience more as part of the creation process, where it opens up the opportunity to educate the audience about what goes into making of theatre, the discipline, the commitment, the dedication. And if some of these people in the audience happen to be policymakers, stakeholders, I think it's an important way to redress, I think, a very persistent misconception that many people who look at theatre from a corporate perspective still have, which is that there's a bottom line to be delivered, there's a product that must be, at some point, be ready, polished perhaps for consumption. But getting people to be part of the behind the scenes creation, I think, is an important way of respecting the tenets that lay behind Pao Kun's view of theatre, but in some sense modernizing it for a different kind of milieu.
Thank you very much for that comment. I mean, we talk about theatre making now, right? We speak of it as if a long time has elapsed, but actually not really, if you think about it, because the conversations that we're having, these would have happened maybe 40 years ago, maybe 40-ish years ago, and that's just about a generation and a half. So how is it that we are negotiating with how theatre is being made now, I suppose, and how might we begin to hold space and find that space for these communities to engage for what that means to make theatre nowadays, and how that has changed in your own practices actually.
Okay, 30 over years ago, a lot of us hold other jobs, and we go into theatre kind of like part-time, and the rehearsal processes were much longer, half a year, 9 months, a year, sometimes 2 years, just to devise or just to look at a piece of work, and we're not being paid at all during that time. And even if we're paid, we are paid like $200 per show. That is in the 1990s. All right. Now the situation has gotten so much better because we have a lot of professionals, which is great. They can do theatre full time, but then that creates yet another problem. They have to be paid. Otherwise, they can't bring home the bacon. They cannot support their family, or they cannot even start a family to begin with, right? So processes become shorter, and production budget becomes much higher, venue higher, space. Last time we used to rehearse at Tapak. We used to rehearse even at LaSalle, the old Goodman Arts Centre, which was formerly LaSalle, and Brother McNally has so generously given William Teo a space free of charge every Saturday to rehearse or to investigate, to devise. Now, who is going to give us those spaces? So, whilst the thought of that is very important, okay, of getting people to come in during our rehearsals, getting people to participate in what we're doing, having longer rehearsals and all that, unfortunately, the practice now is so much shorter, so much more like nowadays it's 6 weeks. If you have 6 weeks of rehearsal time, you are really very fortunate because actors don't commit beyond 6 weeks. If you want actors to commit beyond 6 weeks, like 3 months, then the pay goes more. And sometimes actors are concurrently rehearsing in the afternoon and performing at night in another production. So the ideas, the concepts are great on paper, but we are being the circumstances don't allow us to do it even if we want to do it. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it or we don't need to do it. I think we should still look at it, but I think policies needs to be changed. Maybe the people funding the projects needs to change, or maybe that's what SILA was meant to be. In the previous session we have SIFA and SILA, right? SIFA is Singapore International Festival of the Arts, and SILA is Singapore International Laboratory of the Arts, which is a whole year-round thing. So, and we were talking about SILA being a sandbox where it's okay to fail, it's okay to spend a lot of time, but we may not have product or production at the end of it, it's okay, or even if it's a simple production. I just recently saw a production at Esplanade, which was done on very simple staging. It was a reading, a dramatized reading, but the actors were off script, they were wearing simple clothes and nothing special, no lights, no sound, sound, they had a microphone, but we really enjoyed that. And we haven't seen that kind of production for a long time because I think we're all so used to high value, high production value, big theatre. If you don't do that, they won't come. If you come to a black box, they won't come because it's not shishi enough for them. So these are the things that we need to, for want of a better word, I don't like the word educate because educate seems to, it's not. I think it's maybe awareness, or maybe sharing with them like what Pao Kun has done, what William has done, what Tina has done, in their own way doing it, and trying to start this process going from the theatre companies onwards, meaning the theatre companies like 9 Years Theatre, Nelson continued that after the show, drink tea and drink wine with us and talk to us about it. We don't have a lot of theatre companies. If any reception done is really the shishi, wine and cheese parties, and not much of a talk to each other. How are you? The community, that's happening. That's my observation.
Anyone like to respond to that? Do you have a question? No? So actually there was something that you said just now that I kind of really picked up, that I think kind of resonated, is this idea of care, and that regardless of where you were, these three, they will meet you where you're at, and I think that's really, really important. So I know you don't like the word educate, right? Because our idea of education, in the Singapore education system, I thought then you listen. But really, if you meet a person where they're at, you go on that journey together, where you facilitate, I don't know. I say that as an educator myself, right? And I wonder that, so this idea of these three individuals also kind of, I won't say educated, I would say, but they all trained their actors. When they worked together, they had, I mean, Tina would really be the educator by excellence, because she was very instrumental in bringing arts and education in schools, actually. So the school kind of arts programs that we were all kind of exposed, I was exposed when I was a child, she brought that in, yeah. She brought lots of that in. And so I wonder, how do you think within these confines of how we are working now, in terms of like, we only have 6 weeks to perform a show, to do this, to do that. How could we, what kind of responsibility and how could we have this same duty of care and community in these processes as well? Whether it's maybe the infrastructure now is out, it's out of our hands, but how could we as practitioners, given the own practices that we have, whether it's within an institution, whether it's within your own creative practice, whether it's in producing, how could we share these continuities, and knowledge of care that these people, that these individuals have kind of left us, traces of us that we experience and we kind of carry on in that.
I'm not quite sure what you mean by care, but if something just came to my mind when Lionel was talking about engaging the audience, and Jeremiah, you were talking about how Williams' theatre was always about focused on the community and the way it was open post-production and pre-production. I think that one of the characteristics about the work of all 3 individuals we are considering today is that for them, theatre did not represent capital. Theatre was not about capital. It wasn't about cultural capital. It wasn't about capital. It was about working art in the community. And so the political economy, I think, that enabled them to work in this way at that time, even though it may have only been about 30 or 40 years ago, was considerably different from the economy we are working in today. Just in terms of business costs, in terms of so-called professionalization, and what the cost of professionalization is. I think it's important to understand that the artists working today are working with constraints and with limitations to processes, particularly processes involving production, which are much more intensive than it was in the past. There was a possibility of engaging the community in a way which was much more free. The word that comes to mind is that it was much freer. And we were engaged in this kind of work because the artist essentially was able to retain agency in terms of what they needed to produce. This is no longer the case. It's no longer the case because of regulation. It's no longer the case because of the kind of political economic structures that we are working with now. And I think that's something that we need to recognize. So if we want to change the attitude of audience from that of being mere consumers, we can't do that unless we are able to look at what the structure of working is. And that's one of the key things, I think, that drove all 3 of these individuals. They worked in a structure which was essentially supportive of the kind of art they wanted to make. And they created that structure. The possibility of doing that today is much less because of the political economy that Singapore is today. I think that's something we need to recognize. We can't talk about this as though this was some kind of vacuum. It's not. There are social, political realities, and these have shifted from the past. And we need to recognize that, I think.
I mean, I was actually having a conversation with Jeremiah just before that, and he was like, wow, it's nice to see old friends and old faces, very nice. But where are the young people? I wish more young people would be here. And I don't know, as someone who I was away from Singapore for the last 4 years, and I've just come back to Singapore in the last year or so. And the speed at which Singapore changes is astonishing. I was away for 4 years, and I feel like I don't know anything. I had to start again from ground zero. And I think, I wonder what it means to have to navigate that system now in terms of theatre making, and what it means to have a space to kind of experiment and build things. But more interestingly, I'm also wondering about this idea of cultural identity, right? We talk about Singapore Festival of the Arts, we talk about Singapore theatre. What is Singapore theatre now, actually? I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, it's Singapore theatre that comes out from Singapore, and we've got a language for it. We've got, now we can put Singlish on it. We can put all these multicultural things on it. But what actually is Singapore theatre? And what can our theatre making say about Singapore theatre?
Okay, I go first. Again, it's my personal observation. We were very into the process rather than the product in the earlier days when we were trying to find our own voices and our own identity. And to use words like identity, cultural identity, Singapore theatre, these are very huge words, but I think we've got it. It's just that we all articulate it in different ways as it is. At one point, Singapore theatre was Singlish. At another point, Singapore theatre is about walking across the stage in the slowest way that you could. And then it caught on, and then we moved on, right? And then now Singapore theatre is about, for example, multimedia, working with AI, whatever it is. It moves with time. But if you're really talking about our own identity, I think I would only say it depends on the voices that are prominent at that point in time. So in a way, we do have a diaspora of Singapore theatre in different voices, in the different theatre companies that we have, both established and the young and up and coming. There is a space for it. And I've been advocating also the fact that, this is my personal thing again, I feel that we don't give spaces to the more experienced theatre practitioners or arts practitioners because we're so into the young, emerging, giving them funds and all. It's very important. We need to nurture the next generation. But the moment you are past 50, past 55, past 60, they think that you are already established. We don't need to support you anymore. But think of all the established theatre makers, the Nina Gawa, the Peter Brooks, they're all beginning to have their voices when they're 60. And they're all beginning to start their real work when they're 80. I mean, the best show that I've ever watched in terms of dance was Merce Cunningham when he was 80-something walking across the stage. Despite the fact that his whole company is very vibrant in front, but I was just watching him. Or when Jing Hong did this show with Madame Goh, eating bread for 5 minutes, I was so engaged. Those of you saw that it was a masterclass in acting. She was so real into eating the piece of bread, and she just did nothing but eating the slice of bread for 5 minutes. And to me, that was pure theatre. And that took her how many years to perfect that as it is? You know what I mean, right? So we do have, I think we do have our own Singapore theatre voice, we do have our own Singapore identity. It's just that it's not one identity or one cultural identity or one Singapore vision of the voice, but we have it in many companies as it is. So if you were to look at the plethora of theatre companies, you know which work is what company. You know a theatre works when you see a theatre works. you know a action theatre, not action theatre, wild rice, when you see a wild rice, and you see a toy factory, you know a toy factory, even Pandemonium and Checkpoint Theatre, you know that kind of work. You don't even need to know which company. You go to the production, you see the play, you know that's the company. So to me, that is Singapore theatre in its own, and we see the sum of all parts, the total of the parts, that makes us who we are now and moving forward.
So, I mean, I can see that, and I mean, one of the, when you were talking about the experience of, watching certain things, and especially watching, older practitioners, because I mean, I was at a SIFA show last week. I think I watched Last Rites by Xiao Yi at Emergency Stairs, and they had, so for those of you who watched it, the average age of the performers, and there were 5 of them, was 74, and they were on stage, and I could have watched them for 8 hours. Like, I could just sit there and watch them. And they talked all about it. So there were 5 different actors, and one of them was Singaporean, Yong Se-pin. And what I found most striking, actually, about that performance, so each of them had different crafts. They spoke about their craft, they spoke about their masters, and all of that. And what struck me most about that performance, actually, and I'm coming to it, is Yong Se-pin's kind of, in almost all his monologues, so he spoke about Kuo Pao Kun as his master, but very little of his own practice. And I think, for me as someone who's, researched Singapore theatre, I kind of look through it, I kind of understand, that great cultural significance. But I don't think I really understood it until I watched him deliver that monologue. I mean, that performance that day. And I think it's something that, as, I don't know if I would be considered an emerging theatre practitioner at this point, or still emerging, I don't know what the qualification for being emerging is. But I'm also wondering, I think there are also increasingly more spaces than just theatre that are opening up. So, we're working across, I mean, for example, this is practice. Maybe you can say more about your own practice, perhaps, and how your own kind of experience with your mom, with Mime Unlimited, as you were talking about earlier, and how that has informed your practice and the way you make work and interact with, whatever space the current art scene has as well.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the previous question, but also about what you just said. Wow, there's a lot to go through. Let me try and be succinct. I do think it is different making theatre now than it was making 20 years ago, but I think one thing stays the same. I remember looking through my mother's notes and saying, we're in the red. You're never going to make money doing theatre. I think if you are a theatre practitioner, okay, I say that, but there are a lot of people in the room who have made money in the living making theatre, sorry. I don't mean to step on any toes, please forgive me. But I think when you're in a city state that is so dense, like we are one of the most densely packed places in the world. So many things energetically, artistically are always shifting and molding over each other that, in a sense, Singapore theatre comes out very organically out of this confluence of energies and meetings and artisans. I myself, I got into doing Odyssey, which is classical Indian dance, because the studio that my teacher just taught at was right next to ITI. I picked up Buto because there were practitioners who had come to Singapore at the time and had come to teach. So I think this idea of Singapore theatre is to acknowledge that Singapore as a place is, one, hard to make theatre, and so whatever does come out is definitely worth watching. Sorry, that sounds like not great, but it is true at the same time. And also, you have so many different kinds of people here that whatever does come out of this particular confluence is unique and very much part of the time and the snapshot of the time of which it emerges, which is theatre in a nutshell. I'd like to talk about a young emerging force of performers that I'm part of. I'm not sure if anybody has seen work by the Singapore Buto Collective. If anybody has come, okay, well, I'll explain. Singapore Buto Collective is a young, nascent group of performers who are studying Buto, and we are trying to get more workshops going. We, Shreya, the founder, who I'm speaking for, I hope she doesn't mind, she organizes teachers to come in from overseas, like New York, Evangeline from New York, teachers from Japan, Saiko Ima is coming later in July. So this is, I would say, part of a new wave of a new community of young performance makers, maybe not exactly theater makers, but my experience making Buto performances with other people in ensemble, when I do these kind of things, it is very much theatrical. But how do you create work, organic work, beautiful work that requires time? Because you need time. You don't need just time in rehearsals. You need time in between rehearsals for your brain to rest, to dream, to come back to it. Like in a city where last year, 2,000 restaurants shut down because they couldn't cut the rentals. In a city which the rentals are so high, the cost of living is so high. More than ever, we are being squeezed financially and I think mentally by the demands on our time, electronically, financially. It's like what out of this boiling point, what can come? And I think part of the evolution is to strike down barriers between what is theater. So in March to April, I was part of there was a Buto residency that the Singapore Buto Collective held at Goethe Institute. And part of my research was trying to find Buto techniques that worked in ensemble to create and devise theatrical pieces. Sorry, that's a big ass sentence, but it basically means how to work together in Buto to make show. And the day before we were supposed to perform, there was a leak in the Goethe Institute basement, which we were going to perform in. And this is like a nightmare, you know. Where are we going to rehearse? Where are we going to show? And I called people, my co-creator Wei, she called Tan Wei, another ITI graduate. We called everybody. We were like, "Do you have a space? Do you have a space? Do you have a space?" And actually, we ended up at ITI in the concrete foreground, and we performed Under the Stars, a Buto piece with 10 other dancers. They were some of them amateurs, some of them had done Buto, some of them were professionals, and we had created this show under the cosmos, like this Buto interpretation of the birth and death of the universe. And as I was doing that show, I had these crazy thoughts going through my head. I was like, "This is it. This is the theater. This is the theater I've been looking for." It wasn't vetted. It hadn't gone through like a serious number of like meetings. It organically became itself to a group of audience members who were deeply touched. And this kind of spontaneous occurrence, as you say, is so much harder to come across these days. Like this organic connection to other people who want to make a show and to people who want to watch a show. How do we cut through all the noise, I think, is a question that my collective and the people that I work with, we're always thinking about. Because how we want to do this, we want to do it. How do we afford to keep ourselves clothed and living? How do we get people to come in? These are all questions I ask, and I'm sure all of you have had the same conversation over and over again with your friends. How do we keep going? It's a bit silly to even, when we all had that conversation. But I think it goes back to the same thing of creating spaces to generously offer time to learn. For the Singapore Buto Collective, we have this, if you can't afford to come to a class, we say just pass. Well, if you can't pay, if you can't, then it's okay. Especially for the community classes where members of the community, like myself, for example, we're teaching. If someone can't afford to pay, it doesn't matter. Just come and learn anyway. And if you can't pay in the future, then pay it forward. I think you can only acknowledge the economic and political realities that you're in to keep creating, and you have to keep creating because this is the human thing that ties us all together.
Yeah. It's so very true. The realities of creating theatre in Singapore. Sorry. So anyone else? Yes. Of course you have. Can you? Yes. I think there's a mic coming across for recording purposes.
Liz, thank you. You kind of answered the question I was trying. So, you say time, and then next to you, Jeremiah says, good work after 60, even at 80. But the three individuals that we are talking about, 43, 57, 63. So other than political, economic realities, we have biological, natural realities. So, in the earlier session, I think Sergeant mentioned, you have to question because at any one moment there could be a sense of a crisis and so on. What is it about Singapore where we have these examples of individuals and who could leave that kind of legacy? I mean, we are sad because we wonder, if you can have 5 more years, 10 more years, 20 more years of them, our landscape will be totally different. But the reality is no. And Sasi, the idea that, things were, political economy then was a certain way and now, I think this is a point which is that it's not necessarily going to get better. And worse if you think about what's happening in the world today, and environmental crises and so on. So, I thought you partially answered this because, wouldn't it be quite hopeless, if you think about everything, and why even try? So, I guess you partially answered the question, we must try. Now, the question I want to ask is, since I see some theatre educators here, and some of us belong to institutions, and there's a lot of learning and training in just out there, you don't need to have come out from school sometimes, but training helps, ITI helps, we have LaSalle and NAFA. So the 3 of you, or maybe even 4 of you, if you have to say one thing about theatre education, what is that we must keep a very strong eye on and never ever let go of?
I was never trained as a practitioner. I was trained as a lawyer, so now I teach law at Yong Siu Tu. One big circle, but it's only 10% of my time. Okay. I am an applied theatre practitioner, meaning that I make my money, 60% of my time, to do applied theatre in government corporate jobs. 30% of my time goes back to the theatre, the music, the dance groups that I work with. Is a pay it forward because they never have enough money to pay me what I want or what I think I should be paid. So I pay it forward in the sense that I earn money from the corporate scene, but I'm not just doing corporate work, I'm applying theatre in the corporate scene. That means I'm actually doing events, museums, galleries, exhibitions and all that, but using theatre experiences to create those work, and the government is buying it and is paying me good money for that. Okay, don't tell them. But to answer you, what would the one word that I would tell myself is, I need to express my own voice. I need to find my own voice and I need to express it. So in every work that I do, and those people who work with me, I always apply my own methodology, which I've learned from so many SIFUs, from William Teos to Christian Jit to Ong King San to many other directors I've worked with. I started my own vocabulary, my own methodology, the 3 M's, the mystery, the mythical, mystical, and magical in a sense, and I apply it to my work. And so hopefully when people see my work, no matter how low budget or high value, they will see, oh, there's a Jeremiah Choice work. So for me, I would apply that, my own voice, to all the work that I've done, and hopefully people who worked with me will learn that something from me, just like I had with Pao Kun, with William, and with Christina. They all had their own voices, they all had their own messages, they all had their own way of doing things, and we learned they are successful. So even though they may not have lived much longer, their legacy is because they believed what they were doing and they were doing what they believed in, and therefore at that moment that legacy remained with us. So hopefully I live to a ripe old age of 80 and still talking to people, still hoping. But if I don't, I have my own legacy at whatever time that I lived on.
Sorry. So when I was a first year at ITI, back in 2014, I remember Sasi talking to us about, you have to be a good human being to be a good theater practitioner. I was like, what? Okay. But actually, I genuinely really do believe in that now. Over the years, that's what I have come to believe. That you cannot forget that you are not alone in this process of making theater, that even a solo performer has the backing of funding, stage manager, creatives, like I think our particular contemporary culture, capitalistic culture, imposes a sort of individualism on ourselves that is very at odds with what I think good theater education presents and brings to the forefront, which is it's about connection and remembering that you are not alone and using that connection to materialize work, energy, dynamics, entrances. Like all of it comes from this vital connection between us as human beings. And it's easier to do that if you're a good person.
One thing that I think theatre education should do is perhaps cultivate in the student consciousness of what it is to be autonomous, what it is to be autonomous as an artist, and to protect agency, the ability to work with the things you want to work with the people you want to work with. When we talk about autonomy, we think falsely that it means that you are somehow isolated or alone or all-powerful. That's not what it's about, really. And I think if you look at the work of Pao Kun, if you look at the work of William Teo, and if you look at the work of Christina Sergeant, what you understand is that autonomy and agency comes from the kind of connections that you can make with the people around you, the kind of collaborations that you can make with fellow artists, with audiences, with the bureaucrats, with the powers that be, with the elites, and with the people generally. And unless you're prepared to engage at all of these different levels and continuously work at engaging it, you don't have autonomy. You don't have agency. And what I meant by saying that when the work today is much more about capital, what I'm saying is that artists are less careful about protecting their sense of autonomy, their sense of agency, the need for collaboration, the need to be open. Because essentially they are being driven by a production process. By a production process that ultimately is concerned with the accumulation of capital. And that's why we are in the dilemma that we are in today. Yeah, so I think autonomy and agency.
Thank you very much for the question. Is there anyone else? I believe we have a couple of minutes left. Does anyone else have any questions? Any? Yes, Councilor.
Well, first of all, I really want to acknowledge and thank Liz for sharing. It's a very personal journey for you. Liz also narrated the Christina Sergeant documentary, beautifully done. So I want to acknowledge that. This must have been quite vulnerable for you. So just to add on to what Sasi has said about autonomy and agency, I think one of the things that the most difficult thing for artists right now, or anybody practicing the art, is to actually establish relationship with everything. Relationship with power, relationship with technology, We're all like, everybody's very quick to go to the doomsday narrative, AI is going to take over everything. But then strip it down to what is your relationship with technology? Why are you so frightened of it? Who are you? Where you stand? Relationship with your audience, relationship with each other. So if you build those relationships, and like I said, so the word Sasi uses connection, but I think relationship is about relating, front to the backward. So I think now all three, Christina Sergeant, Kuo Pao Kun, they value relationships, and they actively build relationships, whether it was just talking to somebody on the street. I remember when I was in Writer's Lab in the 90s, Pao Kun was writer in residence. And what he was supposed to do is to talk to every single one of the writers in Writer's Lab. And I was given a designated time to talk to him. And then he looked at me and said, what would you like to talk about? I said, I don't know. Oh, okay. Then when you think of something to talk about, let's meet up again. So, and I never met up with him again, and he never took issue with that. But then again, I think that is the nature of this relationship. I mean, there's a saying in Chinese, 君子交淡如水. That means whatever relationship that you have, it doesn't have to be the intense one, but it has to be one that's free-flowing. So I would like to think that the basis why we look back at them is that we remind us to continue to relate and not be antagonistic towards whatever. And this is very important because I think we live in a culture right now that rewards compliance. And I think a lot of the art that is built right now is built on compliance, which is why the notion of innovation and autonomy is not anymore. Because why would you deviate if you're rewarded for being compliant? Whether it's a national agenda, international agenda, capitalist agenda, neoliberal agenda. Once you comply, you get your money, you get your rewards. So I would like just to again, sound it off with a more optimistic note. It's not the best of times. It's not the worst of times yet. So if we just go back to relating to people, and even artists yourselves, currently Liz's relationship with Pluto, what is your relationship with? And it's all very, very clear to me when I worked with Tina and Laura on casting back what Tina's relationship with her craft was. It was very clear, it was never answered directly. She just said, it was very, very clear. She had a very clear relationship with, and she had a very pragmatic and clear relationship with the working environment. Yeah, so that's the only thing I wanted to add to the conversation. The big word is relationality, but it's actually relationships.
Thanks very much for that, Rob. I mean, theatre is inherently a relational art form. You cannot do theatre alone. And I think if anything, me coming back to Singapore is realizing, I think people don't realize what happens if you ask. We are in a very competitive environment. Because I ask for help, right? That means, I'm less good, or because I fail, I'm less good. But actually, it's not a zero-sum game. It is one that is relational. It's one that happens as a collective. Is there anyone else? Yes, right there.
Just a quick last question. I'm aware of time. Thank you for the sharing, and it's lovely to hear, having watched the documentaries. Sort of adds another level to it, which is beautiful. I was just curious to ask all three of the speakers. I mean, obviously, we're talking about three people who tragically, died far too early and were making a tremendous impact in the scene in all many different ways, and are remembered fondly, clearly, by the community. Knowing them in the ways that you all did, if they were here now, and they were sitting in the scene now, in a way that they could all be, and we wish they were, what do you think their views would be of the ecosystem as it sits right now in the context of how we talk?
Thank you for the question. Would anyone like to take that first?
I'll go first. I can't speak on behalf of William, nor can I imagine what he will say, but if he was still alive, he would say, just do lor. Because he is really go-getter. He never accepts no for an answer. So even when he asked me to do the last show that I had with him, The House of Kuo, which was a deconstructed show that was happening in his auntie's house before they demolished it. I said no, he asked again, I said no, he asked again, and the third time I said yes, and he's very persistent. So it's just exactly what his idea is. When he has something and he wants you in it, there's no way of running away. So in that sense, what would they be doing now? I think they would have moved forward with what William was looking at in terms of theatre, ritual in theatre, working with people. Perhaps things may have changed in the sense of the way of the practice, but he will still continue to be in theatre, and I'm very sure it will be beautiful theatre.
Yeah, I think what I'm going to say is that it's an anecdote really, but it really reflects back on what Jeremiah was saying. I remember at the end of the first year in TTRP, Pao Kun was still around, and we had 14 students that first batch, and we were thinking about whether we should take in the next cohort of students. We didn't have enough in our reserves. So the paradox, the dilemma we faced is, do we go out and recruit students, or do we shut down after the first batch? And I said, we would only have 12 students. What can we do? And I remember Pao Kun looking at me saying, 12 is better than nothing. And I think that's the kind of attitude that he had. Do whatever you can, no matter how small it might seem at that time, it's still worth doing if it's done well. I think that's what he would say. No matter how hard it gets or how difficult it is, do whatever you can and do it well.
Bit hard. Yeah, I don't know what she would say, but I can only imagine that she'd look at the very strange world we find ourselves in, and then she'd find something to make fun of. She had a very good ability to find the joke, which is not just the joke that held together the seriousness and the core of things. She would just keep saying, find what it means, find the clarity, find the center of it, keep going.
And I think on that note, on the anecdotes and the stories, and I think stories more so than just kind of just remembering them, but how they kind of teach us things as well, how they are kind of lessons we carry ourselves in our bodies, in our own experiences, through all these ways of interacting. I mean, I've never interacted with them, but so much of what I've learned in terms of practice, I've learned through them, through other practitioners in this space, through other, those who have come before me. I think these stories and these anecdotes are so important. So thank you very, very much for coming here and sharing so honestly and so candidly. And for everyone else who have not watched these documentaries, get yourselves down to that screening room that's at the back of the Arts House now and go sit there. These are some wonderful documentaries, and you get to know these three individuals and the legacy of their work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.